And I want to echo the gratitude that we've heard around the Chamber today that we all rightly have for our prison officers. And today we've heard much about the kind of environment that can prevail in prisons where, by definition, the most dangerous members of society are incarcerated. And being a prison officer is not a job for those of faint heart. Having said that, it can also be an extremely rewarding career. Something that was made clear to me when I recently visited Greenock Prison last year. Greenock Prison is not in my constituency, but it houses some of my constituents, and some of my constituents work there as well. Prison officers work in a difficult physical environment with high walls and locked doors. And the clientele can be extremely challenging, as we can all imagine. The undercurrent of violence is something that prison officers just have to learn to cope with. But doing so every single day at your work has to take a toll on your mental health. And the impact of that on staff should not and cannot be underestimated. Those they have to deal with are often convicted of the most heinous crimes, and a violent way of life is the way of life for many that our prison officers have to cope with. And these violent prisoners will not always be welcoming or obliging towards prison rules and regulations as disseminated to them by these officers. Even those who enter prison for offences other than violent offences can become so. They can become violent when they are in prison due to the sheer frustration. No one likes to be locked up, regardless of any crime they've committed. And the company that they are required to keep must have an impact on that as well. So our prison officers live every day with the threat of assault at the hands of seriously angry and violent prisoners. And that needs to be recognised across the entire prison estate, across the United Kingdom. And of course, the prisons in Scotland face very real challenges as well, as they do right across the UK. And members have spoken about some of that in detail as well. They've outlined some of it. The member for East Lothian, who opened the debate, reminded us that this is the forgotten service. We rely on prison officers, but too often they are out of sight by the very definition of the job that they do. They have to master a variety of skills. They're not just guards. They often have to fulfil roles such as psychiatric support, social workers, roles that they work very hard to fulfil, but for which they are not properly trained, and they're certainly not properly paid for. And all the time, as they carry out these variety of roles, there is the undercurrent of violence. That is the nature of our prisons. No one should have to go to their work and routinely fear assault. It cannot simply be viewed as part of the job. If prison officers don't feel safe, then they cannot keep prisoners safe. And many prisoners often don't feel safe. The member for Henley pointed out the need for our prisons to be maintained in good repair. The environment matters for the health and well-being of prison officers as well as our prisoners. And the member for North East Fife, with her particular insight as a former police officer, reminded us of the importance of rehabilitation, and a greater emphasis on this would, in turn, create a better climate, ethos and atmosphere for both prison staff and prisoners. The mental health of our prison staff requires more attention. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The member for Strangford talked about the challenges that prison officers need to deal with in terms of the level of suicides in prison. This surely has an additional impact on the mental well-being of our prison staff, as well as all the other challenges they have to face. We all know that many of those in prison themselves suffer from mental health challenges which are not supported to the extent that they should be. And prison officers are left here as well to pick up the pieces that have an undoubted impact on their own mental health. But the criminal justice system and prisons are devolved to the Scottish Parliament. But I want to focus on a very important health and safety issue to our prison staff that is reserved and to which attention must be paid. And it's been referred to by a number of people in the chamber today. And I think it's a really important aspect of this debate. The increasing of the retirement age of our prison officers, given what we have heard today about the difficulties about the job that they do and the constant threat of violence that too many of them face, if not indeed actual violence, which is also far too common a reality for our prison officers, to raise the retirement age to 68 in that context is cruel and I believe betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of the important work that they do. Prison officers, firefighters and police officers are all classified as emergency workers. The work that all of these groups do is essential to the smooth running of our society. And this work puts them in harm's way. So why is it that of all these groups of emergency workers, it is only prison officers who are required to carry out their jobs well beyond the age of 60, until 68 in fact? Who on earth thinks this is a good idea? When we've been talking today about the health and safety of our prison officers, how can it not be as plain as the nose on your face that a prison officer at, say, 66 years old should be dealing with a young, fit, violent, angry prisoner who, let's say, is aged 25. At 25, this prisoner, as well as being young, fit, violent and angry, is also at the peak of his physical fitness. Who on earth, from a health and safety point of view, would think it is acceptable for a 66-year-old prison officer to supervise or instruct this young prisoner? Of course, this prison officer who's 66 years old, might be lucky enough to be ably assisted by his 65-year-old colleague. We can see that this is completely unacceptable, and it places the prison officer at unacceptable risk. Would anyone here seriously be happy with their 66-year-old father being placed in such danger because he was not permitted to retire? Now, I know from other debates that when we get the response from the government, I suspect that he will tell us when he gets to his feet that people are living longer. And to that, I have to say, in this context, blah, blah, blah. What I mean by that, in case there's any confusion, is it's just noise. It doesn't answer the question that has been put today about this situation about ages. After what is often decades of service, for the UK government, for any minister to tell prison officers that despite these decades of dedicated service, they must continue to work until they are 68 years old, knowing that this will directly place these older officers in danger and potentially in situations for which they are physically unable to cope because of their advanced years, is, in my view, negligent and not something which anyone in this debate today would want for their fathers or any other of their relatives, because it's too dangerous. Now, if it's not advisable or desirable or safe for our relatives, for any of our loved ones in such conditions at such an advanced age, it is simply not good enough for the prison officers in our communities who go to work each day. They are part of our emergency services, but they are not treated as such when it comes to retirement age, and nobody appears able to explain why that is the case. Nobody can overestimate the impact that raising the retirement age to 68 is having on the morale of our prison officers. They feel undervalued, overlooked and forgotten about. And when you think about how they're treated relative to other emergency workers, those feelings are perfectly justified. This has to be addressed. Otherwise, we will exacerbate all the problems we've heard about in prisons today by hemorrhaging good prison officers who will be a real loss to the service. The member for East Lothian pointed out we are losing real and valuable experience from the service that is not easy to replace. Who benefits from that? If, as a society, we believe that some people convicted of terrible crimes need to be kept away from society for a particular period of time, then we should automatically, as part of that, believe that those who supervise these people need to be treated in a way which reflects the importance of the job they do when it comes to retirement and parity with other emergency workers in that regard. It's quite simple. We don't want people in prison, but sometimes people need to be in prison. They need to be incarcerated. And that being the case, we need to appreciate the value and value the important work of our prison officers. It really is time for this government to do the right thing and stop deliberately refusing to see how illogical this 68-year-old retirement age is for our prison officers in practical terms, and give prison officers the ultimate health and safety protection they need after dedicating their working lives to looking after those the rest of society simply does not want to see. The UK government needs to deliver this parity, do the right thing, do the decent thing, and to use a favourite phrase of the Prime Minister, just get it done.